that from a pile of grain? Obviously, the real genius of beer is not in the ingredients. It's in the recipe. To get a good look at how it's made, I'm traveling north to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to the Smutty Nose Brewery, an innovator whose beers keep on winning awards year after year.
Their beer is also available here in New York.
About 1,400 craft breweries in the U.S. Together, they make about 4% of the beer consumed in America. Not one of the big guys, but not exactly a homebrew. It's a perfect place to understand how this stuff is really crafted.
You know, I look at a lot of what I do, and I think most brewers do, as more like being a chef.
I always thought of you guys as engineers.
Yeah, and certainly at this scale of brewing, there's a little bit of both. The fun part, of course, is the art and combining the different ingredients.
So let's see how this process works from beginning to end.
Okay, this is our first raw ingredient. It's malted barley.
Malting is the process of soaking grains until they sprout, then quickly drying them. They all gave their lives so that we could drink beer.
He very vastly oversimplified that first step, because I'm going to do a little comparison between beer and wine. You've got to obviously grow the grain. Then you've got to harvest the grain. Then you've got to get the grains into these, just the kernels. Once you have that, you have to germinate them. So you got to get them in water, and then just when they just start to sprout, you got to stop them from growing, which means you add a lot of heat to it. Now the amount of heat, and I should say the longer you add the heat, the darker the grain is going to get. That's really where the color of the beer is coming from. Now your mass-produced beers, how they're pretty clear, that's because they use, you know, this first set of grains here, so it's a little lighter. The longer you keep them in there, the more of that malty flavor you're going to get. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got Guinness. You know, if it's thick and burnt, you've got that bitter flavor. That's because they literally do pretty much burn these grains. That's where most of your color is going to come from. But he vastly oversimplifies that process. And we're still not to the point of where the grape is.
Barley's been used in brewing since the Sumerians invented beer 9,000 years ago. Today, growers harvest 320 million bushels of barley a year. Over 50% is used for food, 40% is malted for beer. Brewers typically buy barley pre-malted. So I can eat these? I can taste these?
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you messing with me?
Pretty much tastes like grape nuts.
Totally eat these. They taste great.
A little dry.
A little dry. A little dry, yeah.
A grinder crushes the barley into bite-sized pieces to increase its surface area. It's then funneled into a 1,000-gallon vat called a mash tun for the first stage of brewing.
So what's going on here is we're going to take our crushed grain, we're mixing it with the hot water. We'll let it sit for about 40 minutes. The liquid at that point, which is called wort, will have the color we need and the sugars that we want for fermentation.
How many pounds of grain?
We're going to add about 2,900 pounds of grain for this batch.
That is one big batch of oatmeal.
Yeah.
Then at the end of this, we're going to drain that sugary water out.
Yep.
And what happens to the mash?
The grain itself will get spun out of this vessel and it becomes cattle feed.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
So nothing goes to waste.
No, happy cows.
This is...
It's very high in protein. That's why the farmers line up to get the stuff.
So what's going to happen to it now?
After a certain amount of time, you start sparging.
Sparge.
Which is when I spray water on the top of the grain bed, basically separating the sugar water from the grain husks.
Okay.
And the other stuff is going to be cattle feed. So you can think of the mash tun as a giant insulated colander.
Or like a coffee filter.
A giant coffee filter.
Oh, you caught me traipsing through the primordial beer rainforest. I think I saw Furosaurus Rex over there. That's so not funny. Okay, let me see if I got this straight. First, you grow the barley, harvest it, germinate the seeds, then quickly dry them in kilns, a process called malting. Next, you crush the malt and mix it up with hot water, creating the mash. Mashing breaks down the starches into sugar. The grain is then strained out, and the remaining sugary liquid is called wort. No, not wort, wort. The malty sweetness of the wort needs something to balance it. A touch of bitter.
At this point, they've also got to cool it down to get it where you can add the yeast to it. Because if you add yeast when it's hot, it just kills the yeast. Now we've had to go through about 8 different steps to get to where you could go to the vineyard and get a bunch of grapes and stomp on them with your feet, and then you've got your sugary liquid. So a lot of people think that it's beer is barbaric. It's for commoners or whatever. That's got that. Unfortunately, it's got that stereotype to it. But it's a hell of a lot easier to make wine. I'm not saying it's easier to make a good wine, but God gives you that grape, and it's already pre-made. It's already got everything in there. But the brewers have to go through all this step, all this process, all this money just to get to the point where they have a grape. And also, he's going to talk about hops. I know you guys are college students. It is part of the cannabis family, but don't get too excited. It doesn't have any of the THC in it.
It's the key ingredient, the secret spice, that transformed beer from thirst quencher to lifesaver, hops. For thousands of years, the beer recipe was simpler than it is today. It was a sweeter brew and had a shelf life of about 1 week. Then, in the Middle Ages, German monks discovered that hops had preservative properties. In a stroke of genius, they added it to beer, making those long beer-fueled voyages across the Atlantic possible. Okay, the hops.
These are hops. Hops are a plant. They're very oily and bitter. Basically, to get a nice aroma out of these, you want to kind of...
You've seen the Sam Adams commercial where he's doing it with the hops. It's the same thing. They do have a really nice citrus floral smell to them. One of the beers that we have today, they add it at the end of the process, so you can actually get that. You'll smell the hops in it. It's a different experience.
This feels like dog food. Hops are so central to beer, it's hard to imagine how anyone got along without them. But be warned. We may soon find out.
What he's talking about here, this is a couple years old. There was a really bad shortage of hops for a while, and we thought there was going to be a really big issue with it. But science came to the rescue for us, basically. They only grow in a very, very short region around the world, and it's the same latitude line. And unfortunately, they were making a lot more money selling all kinds of other things. Yeah, he's still talking about that, but
a worldwide shortage.
The farmers were getting government subsidized to grow corn for ethanol, so a lot of them stopped growing hops, which kind of screwed the brewers pretty bad. For a couple of years, the hops it went up like 500%, but it's come back down now. It's not a it's not a crisis like we thought it was going to be. And if you ever seen how these hops are grown, oh, he's talking about you'll see there. Now see, we actually fall in there. New York State used to sell a lot of hops, used to grow a lot of hops. We don't anymore. I have hops growing at my house though. You can actually grow them. They grow really, really quick. How tall are they right now, Sue? Yeah.
For craft brewers like Smutty Nose, the emergency is even more dire because they're...
See, craft brewers also use a lot more of the hops than like Labatt's and Budweiser and that. They don't use that much.
Double IPA, Imperial IPA called Big A IPA. All right.
Yeah, he's going to do that. It's that Miller commercial where they show that they add hops 3 different times. Well, everybody does. You add hops in the beginning. You add hops in the beginning because when you boil them, they release their oils, which is where you get your preservatives from. If you add them towards the end, that's when you're going to get that floral flavor, which we're going to tell on the Long Trail IPA. I've got a pale ale and an IPA, and you're going to be able to tell a huge difference because of when they add those hops at the end. You'll definitely be able to taste that.